White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt is no stranger to the intensity of the briefing room, where pointed questions and political maneuvering dominate the air. However, today's press conference took an unexpected turn when a young girl's innocent curiosity led to a deeply personal moment that left the room silent and brought Leavitt to tears. It was supposed to be a routine briefing, with journalists from major networks gathered, waiting for updates on domestic policies, economic initiatives, and the latest in the administration's legislative agenda. The atmosphere was as tense as ever, reporters poised to dissect every word, prepared to challenge responses, to extract information that could lead the next day's headlines. Karoline Leavitt, composed and professional as always, fielded their questions with precision, navigating the exchange with the confidence expected from a White House spokesperson. Midway through the briefing, just as Leavitt was responding to a question about tax reform, an unusual voice interrupted. It wasn't a seasoned journalist pressing for clarification or a reporter attempting to push for an answer she had evaded. It was a child. "Miss Leavitt." The room, conditioned to a steady rhythm of press inquiries and prepared statements, fell unusually quiet. Leavitt, mid-sentence, paused, her expression shifting from controlled authority to mild surprise. Her gaze moved from the sea of reporters in front of her toward the side of the room, where a small girl stood just beyond the press pool. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, her brown hair neatly tied into pigtails, a small stuffed bear clutched tightly in one arm. She wasn't raising her hand or waiting to be called on. She had simply spoken, her voice soft but clear enough to capture the attention of everyone in the room. There was a brief, almost imperceptible moment of hesitation. The White House press briefing is a place for sharp exchanges, political posturing, and the relentless pursuit of headlines. It is not a place for innocent interruptions, and yet in that moment, something about the child's presence seemed to break through the rigid structure of the event. Leavitt, ever the professional, adjusted quickly, offering a small, genuine smile. "Hello there," she said, her voice noticeably softer than it had been just moments before. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated briefly before answering, her voice carrying just enough uncertainty to reveal that she was aware she had done something unusual. "Emily," she said. "Well, Emily, it's very nice to meet you," Leavitt replied, her expression warm but curious. "Did you have a question for me?" Emily nodded, but instead of asking about politics, policy, or the kinds of issues typically debated in that room, her gaze remained fixed on something else entirely. "I like your necklace," she said simply. "Is it special?" Leavitt blinked, and for the first time that afternoon, she hesitated. It was an unexpected question, one she clearly had not prepared for. Reporters exchanged glances, some raising their eyebrows, others subtly adjusting their recording equipment, sensing that they were about to witness a moment outside the usual script of Washington briefings. Leavitt's hand instinctively moved to the delicate gold necklace resting just above the neckline of her blouse. It was a small, simple cross, the kind of piece that might go unnoticed in the high-pressure environment of political discourse. And yet, here was this little girl, pointing to it, asking about it as if it were the most important thing in the room. For a brief second, Leavitt's typically steady demeanor wavered. She opened her mouth, but no words came. To those watching closely, it was evident that the question had struck something deep, something unexpected. The reporters, many of whom had covered Leavitt for years, had seen her handle the toughest inquiries, deflect the most loaded questions, remain unwavering even in the face of controversy. But now, for the first time, they saw her struggle. Not because she was being challenged, but because she was being asked something real, something human. She took a breath, as if steadying herself before finally speaking. "Yes," she said, her voice quieter than before. "It's very special." Emily's eyes remained locked on hers, waiting. Leavitt swallowed, her fingers brushing the pendant. "My grandmother gave it to me when I was about your age," she continued. "She always told me that no matter where life takes me, as long as I keep my heart in the right place, I'll never be lost." The room, so often filled with sharp questioning and tense exchanges, had taken on an entirely different energy. Emily studied the locket for a moment before asking, "Is she still here?" Leavitt exhaled slowly. "No," she said softly. "She passed away a few years ago, but I keep this with me to remind myself that she's still with me in a way." Emily nodded as if she understood something far beyond her years. "I think she'd be really proud of you." A hush fell over the room. The words were simple, but the effect they had on Leavitt was immediate. Her composure cracked, just slightly, but enough for those paying close attention to notice. Her eyes glistened, and she let out a breath that was almost a laugh, almost a sigh. "You think so?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded firmly. "Yeah, 'cause you help people, just like she wanted." For the first time in her career, standing at that podium, in that room, surrounded by reporters and cameras, Karoline Leavitt had no response. She reached up, wiped at her eyes quickly, and let out a small, self-conscious chuckle. The reporters remained silent, some shifting in their seats, others quietly taking notes, understanding that what they had just witnessed was something rare. A genuine moment. The political world is built on strategy, messaging, and optics. But sometimes moments like these break through. Moments where the job titles and political debates fade into the background, leaving behind nothing but an unguarded exchange between two people. The White House press briefing room remained uncharacteristically quiet in the wake of the brief but deeply personal exchange between Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt and young Emily. The moment had unfolded so naturally, yet it left an undeniable mark on the room. The kind of rare, unscripted human connection that cuts through the usual political back and forth. Reporters, normally quick to move on to the next question, seemed hesitant. Some glanced at one another, uncertain if they should resume the normal pace of questioning or allow the moment to breathe. A few discreetly tapped out notes on their laptops, recognizing the weight of what had just occurred. Others, for once, simply watched. Leavitt, visibly affected, took a deep breath and blinked a few times, regaining her composure as she subtly adjusted the microphone. Though she had fielded countless questions in that room, none had caught her off guard quite like Emily's. The press secretary had spent her career prepared for confrontation, for scrutiny, for the relentless pursuit of policy clarifications. She had not, however, anticipated the quiet power of a child's curiosity piercing through the rehearsed nature of political discourse. She gave Emily a small smile, one that carried gratitude, before glancing up at the press corps. "Well," she said, her voice just slightly softer than before, "I wasn't expecting to cry at today's briefing." A few quiet chuckles rippled through the room, a brief release of the lingering tension. But Emily wasn't finished. The little girl's gaze had never wavered from Leavitt, her wide brown eyes still fixed on the cross necklace. She seemed to sense that there was more to the story, that the press secretary's words had only scratched the surface of what the pendant meant to her. "You said she gave it to you when you were little," Emily said. "Did you always wear it?" Leavitt hesitated again, as if weighing whether to share more. She could have deflected, could have gently steered the conversation back to the reporters in the room, but something about the girl's sincerity, about the unexpected turn the briefing had taken, made her decide otherwise. She glanced down at the small cross resting against her blouse, her fingers brushing over it. "Not always," she admitted. "When I was younger, I didn't understand how much it really meant. I knew my grandmother gave it to me, and I knew she loved it, but I didn't wear it every day. It wasn't until after she passed away that I really understood why she wanted me to have it." Emily tilted her head, her small fingers playing with the hem of her dress. "Why?" The question, so simple, carried an ocean of meaning. Leavitt could feel the weight of it pressing against her, urging her to give the real answer. She let out a slow breath. "Because when I lost her, I felt like I lost a part of myself. I didn't know how to fill the space she left behind. For a long time, I didn't think anything could." Her voice, though steady, had taken on a quieter, more introspective quality. "But this," she lifted the cross slightly, "this reminded me that she wasn't really gone, that the love she gave me, the lessons she taught me, the strength she believed I had, it was all still with me, even when I couldn't see her anymore. The room remained still. It was the kind of answer that went beyond a simple anecdote. It was raw, personal, unfiltered. For a few long moments, even the reporters who had spent their careers dissecting every statement uttered in that room seemed unsure of how to proceed. It was rare, if not unheard of, for a press secretary to speak from such a vulnerable place in the middle of a briefing. But no one interrupted. No one rushed to move on. Emily, standing with her stuffed bear tucked under her arm, absorbed the words carefully. Then after a brief pause, she reached up and touched her own neck. There was no necklace there, only bare skin, but her fingers traced a spot where one might have rested. "My mom had one," she said, her voice suddenly quieter. "But she had to sell it." Leavitt's breath caught. There was no need for further explanation. The room may have been filled with journalists accustomed to digging for details, but no one asked Emily to elaborate. The words hung in the air, enough on their own. For the first time, it wasn't just Leavitt who was visibly moved. A few reporters shifted in their seats, their expressions subtly softening. The press corps, despite its reputation for relentless questioning, was still composed of human beings, and this was not the kind of moment that could be reduced to a soundbite. Leavitt's fingers, still resting against her cross, curled around it tightly. Without thinking, without considering whether it was the right thing to do in the middle of a televised press conference, she reached behind her neck and unclasped the chain. The room collectively held its breath. Leavitt gently took Emily's small hand and placed the necklace in her palm. The girl's eyes widened in shock. "But it's yours now," Leavitt said simply. Emily's fingers instinctively curled around the delicate cross, as if afraid it might disappear if she let go. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Her small chest rose and fell in unsteady breaths, her wide brown eyes shimmering. A quiet murmur moved through the room. Even the White House aides standing at the back of the press room, usually stone-faced, appeared momentarily caught off guard. Emily's mother, who had been standing just behind the press corps, took a step forward. Her own eyes were damp, her expression caught between gratitude and disbelief. I don't know what to say," she murmured. Leavitt shook her head slightly. "You don't have to say anything." The moment was small, barely a few seconds long, but it carried the weight of something much larger. It was not about politics. It was not about strategy. It was about something far more fundamental. The quiet, unspoken way in which people lift each other up, even in the most unexpected places. Then, without warning, Emily launched herself forward and wrapped her small arms around Leavitt's waist. The press secretary, momentarily startled, quickly returned the embrace, her arms enveloping the little girl in a hold that was both firm and careful. She closed her eyes for just a moment, as if absorbing the warmth of the gesture. The press room, so often filled with sharp exchanges and political tension, had transformed into something else entirely. Faith, humanity, kindness, and a little girl who, just by asking one simple question, had reminded everyone in the room, perhaps even the entire country, what truly mattered. As Emily finally pulled away, her small fingers still curled protectively around the gold cross necklace. She stared down at it, as if trying to comprehend that it was truly hers. The room, despite its usual function as a political battleground, felt softer somehow, as though the usual barriers separating the administration from the press had momentarily dissolved. Leavitt, still crouched at the little girl's level, brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear and offered a small smile. "It looks good on you," she said gently. Emily didn't respond at first. Instead, she traced the delicate edges of the pendant with her thumb, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "I'll keep it forever." A lump formed in Leavitt's throat. She knew the feeling well, the weight of something sentimental, something that wasn't just a possession, but a tether to something bigger. The necklace had been that for her, a reminder of the past, a source of comfort in difficult moments. And now somehow she had instinctively known it was meant to belong to this little girl instead. A few reporters had subtly lowered their cameras, recognizing that what they were witnessing wasn't just another moment to document, but something deeply personal. Others, still journalists at their core, took notes furiously, knowing that this was an exchange people would talk about long after the day's policy discussions were forgotten. At the back of the room, Emily's mother, a woman with kind but tired eyes, stepped forward. She hesitated before speaking, as if afraid to break the spell that had settled over the room. I don't know how to thank you," she finally said. Her voice was thick with emotion, barely above a whisper. Leavitt stood slowly, her own expression softening. "You don't have to." The woman swallowed hard, blinking rapidly as if trying to hold back tears. "She talks about that necklace every night before bed," she admitted, glancing down at her daughter. "The one I had to sell." She exhaled shakily. "I never thought she'd have another one." Leavitt's chest tightened. She had known the moment Emily spoke about the missing necklace that the story behind it was a difficult one. A mother selling something precious because feeding her child was more important than sentimentality. A little girl who, despite her young age, understood that sacrifice in ways a child shouldn't have to. Now the weight of that reality settled over the entire room. There were no policy debates to be had about this moment. No talking points, no angles to spin. Just a woman, her daughter, and a piece of gold that now meant more than anyone in that room could truly grasp. Then something unexpected happened. A man near the back, dressed in a slightly worn suit, hesitated before reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a few folded bills, nothing extravagant, just a handful of cash, but he stepped forward and pressed them gently into the mother's hand. "For groceries," he said simply. The woman's lips parted in shock. "Oh no, Please," he interrupted, shaking his head. "It's not charity. It's just the right thing to do." For a moment, the press room wasn't the White House briefing room at all. It wasn't the place where reporters battled for sound bites or where policies were scrutinized under harsh lights. It was just a room full of people who, for once, weren't divided by politics, but united by something far more important. One by one, others stepped forward. A journalist from a major news network handed over a gift card for a local grocery store. Another woman, standing near the back, removed a simple silver bracelet from her wrist and handed it to Emily, whispering, "Something pretty to go with your necklace." No cameras flashed. No one in the room moved to make a statement about what was happening. Because for once, it wasn't about politics. It was about people. Leavitt stood quietly, watching the scene unfold, her hands clasped in front of her. She had walked into the briefing room that day expecting nothing more than the usual back and forth, the usual tension, the usual strategic maneuvers. Instead, she had been reminded of something she hadn't thought about in a long time. How often do we talk about kindness without acting on it? How often do we discuss faith but fail to live it out? Emily turned, gripping the necklace tightly as she looked up at her mother, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now we both have something back." The mother let out a soft, tearful laugh as she wrapped an arm around her daughter's small shoulders. As the small acts of generosity continued, the press corps seemed momentarily unsure of how to proceed. The briefing had shifted into something unrecognizable, something unplanned, and yet no one was in a hurry to return it to its usual state. Finally, a veteran reporter, one who had spent decades in that very room covering every kind of political event imaginable, cleared his throat. "Madam Press Secretary," he said carefully, his voice lacking the usual sharpness reporters used when addressing her, "I don't think any of us expected today to turn out this way." Leavitt let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "Neither did I." A few chuckles rippled through the room, though they were laced with something different, an awareness that, for the first time in a long time, they had been part of something genuine. She let out a slow breath, gathering herself before straightening her posture. "I think," she said, her voice measured but warm, "that sometimes we all need to be reminded what really matters." There was nothing else to say. She could have returned to the day's policy discussions. She could have moved on to the next question in the briefing. But somehow, everyone in that room understood that the briefing was over, not because time had run out, but because the most important moment had already happened. As Emily and her mother turned to leave, Emily paused just long enough to glance back at Leavitt. "Miss Leavitt?" Caroline turned toward her. "Yes, sweetheart?" The little girl hesitated, as if trying to find the right words. Then she clutched the necklace once more and said simply, "I think my mom was right. You gave me more than a necklace." Leavitt's throat tightened as she nodded, offering a smile that held more emotion than any words she could have mustered. "And you gave me more than a question." The little girl beamed before turning and running to catch up with her mother. Leavitt remained at the podium for a moment longer, watching them disappear through the door. Then, with a final glance around the room, she gathered her papers, gave the press one last nod, and stepped away from the podium. As the doors swung closed behind her, the journalists remained seated for just a moment longer, as if reluctant to let go of the moment they had just witnessed. In a world that's so often focused on division, on strategy, on winning or losing, today had been a reminder of something far more powerful. A single act of kindness, a moment of shared humanity. A little girl's question that had changed everything.